Hello, everyone, and welcome to Magma Rage's episode 70. It's been quite a while since we've been here, but I'm here, as always, with Pandemonia. How are you doing, Pandemonia?
I'm doing well on yourself, Dib.
I'm
been a while.
doing fairly well. Yeah, it has been a while. And we've kind of missed out on quite a lot in that meantime. Some nerfs, new expansion announcements and that. But what we're going to be talking about today and focusing on today is the important announcements around the next competitive year for Hearthstone and the Grandmasters master announcements. So don't worry. If you want to hear all about the expansion, our opinions on that so far, we're going to get right back to that with the next episode, which will be a lot sooner, hopefully next week. And then we're going to still do our normal card reviews and all of that once it's closer to the time and we get more information about all the cards. So we're still going to be talking about the expansion a lot in the future, but right now we want to focus on this Grandmaster announcement that Blizzard made today, today in our time, which was 28th of March. So Blizzard have already announced the Masters tours. We already had players playing and trying to qualify for those, but they hadn't announced the top tier yet, and that's the Grandmasters. So now we've got a little bit more information about the Grandmaster tour, as Blizzard have kind of announced how the structure and that is going to work for that. So what are we looking at for the Grandmaster tour, Pandemonia?
So it's basically going to be 16 players per the regions. So it's Europe, North America, and Asia. So that's 48 players. And they each, within those 16 players per region, they're going to be split into two groups of 8, where they're going to play a double round robin, which is going to obviously be in specialist. Then the bottom 2 of each group, I think, can get relegated at the end of season 2. So that basically means that there might be some sort of playoffs. Like exactly who will qualify for the playoffs, like to try and get promoted, isn't actually very clear right now.
Yes.
So that's just speculation. Possibly the winners of the Master Series.
Yeah, it'll be somewhat based on Masters from what we can tell, but we can't tell the exact way that Blizzard are going to determine that. And I think they've kind of purposefully left that a bit unclear.
Vague.
But we'll get back to that issue a little bit later. We can also see that the schedule is kind of broken down such that we get 2 seasons of this Masters per year, as I think you mentioned, and it culminates in a global final in November. So I think what this does is it kind of aligns the esports year much more closely to the actual year, rather than this weird situation we have now where we have the HCT World Championships for 2018 happening in May of 2019. So hopefully this also makes it a bit cleaner with their release schedule for expansions and stuff as well. And we don't end up in this weird scenario where we actually are also going to be in Year of the Dragon for the Year of the Mammoth, culmination of the esports thing. It's all quite weird, and at least that's one nice thing about having the global finals set for November, right? And November is also when BlizzCon is, so we can assume it's going to be at BlizzCon. I mean, they didn't really say that.
And they moved it away from it, so it's tough to say, actually.
Yeah, but it looks like it might be based on the fact that it's in November, but there's no real confirmation as to that yet. And how you're going to actually get to this global finals is the top 3 from each regional group will go into a 6-player playoff, and the winner for each season makes it to the finals along with the two players from the China Gold Series. So once again, China kind of doing their own thing, and it looks like we'll have maybe 8 players in that in that global finals in November. So we'll have 3 from each region in each season, it looks like.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's not necessarily true. You can have... It won't necessarily be an equal representation from the regions, I believe. Oh, no,
I think
it will be.
It's within
okay.
They are regional it's regional finals. So
sorry.
I think it will be even representation.
Yeah, so the only time we're going to see cross-regional play will be at the global finals in November, right? Other than players from different regions will probably be participating in the Masters tours, but like on a Grandmaster and above scale, that's the only time we're going to see cross-regional play. So 8-player grand finals in November, that seems a bit weird, but anyway, maybe they'll get in other players from other formats to reach the global finals. We'll have to see. But I mean, this kind of raises the question of how do they decide exactly who's in Grandmasters?
So this has been quite contentious, but from what it seems, I mean, this is based on the leaked list so far. It's been guys who've won, it's been the players who've won world championships, who've done world HCT, as well as lifetime earnings, and even the one that's kind of caused the most controversy is contribution to the community. So basically, that's, I think it looks like a lot of it's come down to the popular streamers and the more like sort of popular players.
Yeah. So I mean, Blizzard haven't specified the players yet. We'll get to that in a sec, but they have kind of specified their rough criteria, which is, I think, purposefully vague so that they can basically invite who they want for whatever reasons they want and not have to necessarily disclose the individual reasons for each invite. They're going to be revealing who these players are as well after the World Championships. And the actual Grandmasters schedule is going to start on the 17th of May. So we're probably going to see some players, some final invites be decided by who does well at the HCT World Championships. Because it would be weird if we have the winner from the HCT World Champions not even invited to Grandmasters, right? I mean, I think that would be weird.
There'll be massive outcry with that.
Yeah, so I think what they've had to do is leave at least one spot open in each region. And that's kind of what we see when we look at that leak list that you were mentioning from this Invin Global leak that they kind of gave out last week about the Grandmasters. And most of the facts that they've mentioned have been corroborated by this Grandmasters announcement. But there's a few other things like this invited player list that haven't yet really been announced or confirmed. So based on this list, we have 15 players in Europe. Psycho, Ball Control, Fino, Casey, Calento, Tice, Bunny Hopper, RDU, Hunter Ace, Orange, Boston, Yarla, Pavel, Silvername, and Swids. Mostly fairly well-known players. And then in Americas, they've confirmed 30. Well, they've leaked 13 so far. Just saying, Muzzy, Amnesiac, Frozen, Zalay, Purple, Dog, Firebat, Bloodyface, PNC, Nalguran, Monsanto, and Seohyun. So, I mean, almost all of those faces are pretty recognizable. There's a variation in there of kind of your more popular streamers, like your Tices and Dogs and Silver Names, to some players that actually often perform really well but haven't necessarily gotten their big breaks, like Casey or Yarla, or
Yarla is there.
No. So I'm saying he's in the list. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, he is one of those players that has performed very well and collected a lot of HCT points and performed well at HCT events, but hasn't necessarily gotten like a big name. They haven't built a big name for themselves in the same way that somebody like Hunter Ace has. Even though Hunter Ace has not really been streaming, for example, until recently. I mean, I think somebody like Hunter Ace is probably one of the better examples of a well-known competitive player that doesn't really stream. Just because
as
of
opposed
how
to like
dominant
Tice and RDU, who are massive streamers.
Yeah, but not really well known for their competitive play in recent times. So yeah, I mean, there's quite a few contentious things about the players in this list. One thing they did announce as well when they announced the whole Roger ban thing is that Roger and I forgot the other player, Reels. Yeah, I think so. Wouldn't be invited to Grandmasters. So because
of the cheating.
Yeah, well, because of the win trading stuff. Actually, it was specific to the win trading, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, I don't want to go too much into the Roger thing. That's another thing we kind of didn't really have time to discuss. So Let's actually look at the names here. I mean, Europe obviously packed with quite a lot of names that we see perform well in a lot of events. And then, I mean, to me, there's a couple standout names in here that are questionable. I mean, from like the streamer side of things, we have Tice and Silvername as probably the two biggest streamers on that list. Silvername is a huge Russian streamer, for those that don't know. Who he is. And Tice has often one of the highest viewerships. Oh, and of course, Kalento. So all of those players not really performed as well in events. I mean, Tice is on like Lorinda's stats lists is kind of up there in the top 100 players at least, but that doesn't really lend credence to the argument of actually inviting him for the top 16 in Europe. But anyway, I am happy that they have invited some of the lesser well-known names like Psycho and Yala. But I think it's pretty interesting. There's quite a few problems I have with some of the names. I don't want to go into it too much now. And I mean, it's pretty much the same that we see in Americas, with a fair split between the USA, Canada, and South America in a way. I say a fair split, but it's really only PNC and Nagadan from South America. And Seo Hyun from Canada. Or he lives in Canada, right?
I think he's Canadian, yeah.
Yeah, but Chinese actually, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, but like he falls under Canada.
Yeah, because he lives there. Yeah, in the same way that like Tyler these days is playing under Vietnam, but he's lived most of his life in Holland. Anyway, so yeah, it's those are the names of the players we have so far. I think we kind of can now talk about what are the good things and the bad things that the Grandmasters is going to give us. So, let's start off on a positive. Let's talk about some of the good things that we have here. I think the one big thing that stands out to me is that they've gone with a format and a structure that is very heavily spectator focused. So it's all about the spectator experience, giving you these recognizable names and very consistent dates and that for the tournaments. It's going to be every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. There's a very specific number of games played across the different regions. I imagine they're going to time it so that it works for players in each kind of time zone regions viewing in some way, right? It's not all going to be NA times or all going to be EU times or all going to be APAC times, I imagine.
I think they're going to try and make I mean, it would make sense, but I hope they don't just try and stream the European games at a European time. I hope there's sort of a decent split. So I can watch at a reasonable time. I can watch Asian matches if I really wanted to.
Yeah.
But I could probably foresee them streamlining in a way where it's the Asian matches are kind of at good times for the Asian watching the community, and Europe for Europeans, etc. So which means for us, the chances are in South Africa, the best watching time will be to watch the European one, right?
Yeah, and I mean that also depends. Like Friday is the most tricky of those days because most people obviously work on Fridays. So if it's during the day, it's a lot less flexible as to when you can watch. But another thing that was a complaint about the 2018 HCT year was about kind of an overload of tournaments and being very difficult to follow as a spectator. And that's kind of, if you just want to follow the highest top tier of Hearthstone, then you can just focus on Grandmasters. If you want to follow below that, maybe you can watch the Masters tournaments, assuming they're also streamed. And then if you want to watch even more than that, hopefully there will be some third-party tournaments as well. And that kind of takes me to another topic that I was thinking about just as we were recording now. Another positive of this is that it does open up a little bit more space for third-party tournaments because the calendar isn't as kind of chock-a-block full. and it leaves open most weeks basically for third-party tournaments. If you wanted to run like a team league or any other given tournaments, you at least have some structure that you can work around.
Sure. But we haven't quite touched on yet. But one of the good things I think, specifically linked to the spectator, the whole spectator aspect, is that because it's very difficult. We can talk about a bit more about it, but it's very difficult for you once you're in Grandmaster to actually drop out of it. So the whole thing is it will kind of, spectators will be able to like follow their fan favorite, kind of throughout the year. I mean, it has that like whole storyline aspect, as well as fans. Much like people support big teams in soccer or cricket or rugby. Pretty much this is what's going to happen now, right? You're going to have more or less the same players in the Grandmaster each season, so you can kind of go, oh, I hope this player, beats this player, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so it's going to be easier for you to build relationships with the players as a viewer. That's kind of what the scenario is, right? There's a much higher chance that the player you support, you're going to be able to watch them every week rather than only when they do well in this, let's say like DreamHack type tournament, and then they actually get chosen to be streamed as well. So you're going to be able to see the players that in the Grandmasters much more consistently, which is also very good for the teams of the players that are in Grandmasters. I think that's another very good. It's kind of a very good way of bringing more teams and getting teams to commit more to Hearthstone as a whole. Because the teams are going to get a lot more promotion because they guaranteed that their players are going to be getting all this stream time, with all of their games in the Grandmasters being streamed. And they guarantee by having these GM players signed that they're getting their team out there in the kind of the top tier Hearthstone esports, which hopefully will pull in a decent viewership. So it's very good return on investment and exposure for the teams that are actually sponsoring the Grandmaster players. And I mean, we see with quite a few of the players already, they already have existing contracts and partnerships with biggish teams like Dog with Team Liquid, or Tice and RDU with G2, or Muzzy and Saiyan with Tempo Storm. So there's quite a few teams out there already being represented, but I can imagine for a lot of the smaller or the lesser well-known players in the Hearthstone Masters that they're gonna in the Grandmasters, that they're gonna get more interest from bigger brands that might have been bigger endemic esports brands that might have been less keen on Hearthstone before. So we could see those kind of teams coming back as well.
But I think what goes hand in hand with this good, with like what you say is good, is equally the problem of if you're not in Grandmaster, the value, like as a player and even as like an esports organization, the value in having a player in anything besides Grandmaster substantially drops now.
Yeah.
Like there's very little incentive, for an organization to brag about how they've got to play in the Masters. Basically, the big focus is going to be on Grandmaster. Is going to be in the Grandmasters, right?
Yeah, because not only are you guaranteed a lot less stream time, your costs are going to be higher. Because in Masters, in Grandmasters, it seems that a lot of this is going to happen online. Which means that you don't have to foot out costs for the players to fly around and stuff. Whereas in Masters, you have to travel to these tournaments, like the first one that we have in Las Vegas, that players are qualifying for now. And that means that teams are going to have to sponsor Master players to actually attend these events. And then with these events being quite big, there's a relatively low chance of a positive return on investment. So it does leave a lot of those players very stranded in that way. But we're kind of touching a little bit on the bad things as well, even though we wanted to kind of focus a little bit on the good.
Yeah, because it kind of went hand to hand.
Yeah, definitely goes hand in hand. So for these Grandmaster players, I mean, we've kind of already mentioned that it's quite difficult to get relegated with only 2 out of 16 in each region that have a chance or are at risk of being relegated in a whole competitive year. You have a pretty
not
high...
even guaranteed.
Yeah, you have a pretty high chance of staying in the league. If you're already a Grandmaster, it's very easy for you to retain that status. You have very consistent tournaments that you can plan your schedules and stuff around. You don't have to worry about travel impacting your schedules. So for a lot of those that stream, they've kind of got the whole week free to stream as well, which I think is very important for Blizzard and a lot of these players involved. I mean, a lot of the reason players like Tice and Kalento and Dog might not have traveled to more HCT tour stops is because it's not just like the financial return is just not there, right? They can rather stream and have more of a guaranteed financial return than going to a tournament where you have to kind of perform well to actually get that, get your money back for all the expenses you have to put into it. So I think that's pretty important for all the players that are also like streamers as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely seems Blizzard is trying to, appeal to certain parts of the community more than others. But like I said, this has kind of created a lot of debate online as to, should it be more? Because especially now with the revision of the system, so for example, ladder grinding means nothing now, almost.
Yeah. Yeah, and also for these Grandmaster players, shout out to Noblord here for doing some maths and kind of putting together his thoughts in a tweet that was pretty interesting. It seems like the Grandmaster players are kind of guaranteed about $28,000 in prize money, which is further motivation for the teams that might be taking a cut of that, and also further motivation for the players to kind of be involved and to kind of keep their status, because you get this guaranteed income, which means you can really be full-time focused on Hearthstone, right? And that's important that the players at the top are, full-time pros. One of the other things that Noblord mentioned that I hadn't really thought of was about it allowing the players to have more communication with with Blizzard about about improving the formats, whether it be specialist or whether it be the structure for these tournaments, and kind of iterating on the system rather than what we've seen in the last couple of years, frankly, which is them redoing the whole system from scratch every year. So maybe having that tighter communication with a smaller base of players will facilitate that. The only problem there is that all the players that are already in Grandmasters are incentivized to keep some of the things that we might be saying are bad, like the fact that it's hard to get relegated, right? They're incentivized to say, yeah, that's a good thing. Whereas on the outside, most players are incentivized to say, no, that's not good. And you kind of have to look at a little bit where their communication and their recommendations might be a little bit biased.
Yeah, and also, I mean, what are we on the negatives? The problem is also just the qualify, just the actual path to get there. Like, I mean, if we start with, so you have to start with these, what's it they call them, the Masters qualifiers.
Yeah.
Has there really been like 100 of them, or like 90? I saw.
Yes, there has been 100 now, and it's quite difficult for these. From my experience, from playing in a couple of them, it's pretty difficult as well, because with the qualifiers happening now for Las Vegas, the times for Europe really don't work out. Like, it's on some days it was like 10 a.m. in the morning, and like there's no way I can do that because I work. And then maybe the latest one started at 3 p.m., which once again, I don't get home from work before 3 p.m., as most people don't. So if you have a job, it's actually very difficult to find the time. So I was mostly playing NA because they would have some ones that started maybe 6 p.m., 5 p.m., 8 p.m. in my local time. And what that meant was those were kind of the only ones I could play, which meant I was already playing on a server where I don't have most of my collection, which disadvantages me. And then even if I do well, those tournaments can sometimes last 10 to 14 hours with the big Swiss tournaments.
That's one of the drawbacks of Swiss now, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a top 8 after that, isn't there?
Yes.
There's a Swiss, then a cut to top 8. And okay, and let's just go back. And even worse before that is, so challenge number 1 is you first actually got to get into one of these tournaments.
Yep.
That's arguably that's like one of the toughest parts, is because like these spots fill up really quickly.
Yeah.
So once you've got it, now you have to play in this Swiss tournament, and then now if you win that, you get a spot at. So the first Masters tour is in Las Vegas, but you like, especially for us who live far away, you have to pay for your own transport and accommodation to get there. And then the current information we have from Blizzard, there's no even concrete sort of, if you win it, you guarantee Grandmaster. It's kind of left up to their discretion. So, I mean, you could win. I mean, we were discussing this offline, that, like, if a nobody won one of the Masters events and you had a more well-known player come top 4 in, let's say, 2 or 3 of them, it's arguable that Blizzard would probably select the guy the more well-known person who made 3 top 4s or 2 top 4s over you, the no-name player who actually won it.
Yeah, I mean, based on their history of how they've chosen the initial seeded players, right? I mean, that seems reasonable based on that. So it's just super unclear as to how you can get into Grandmasters as a master player. You have to go through this massive gauntlet, which, because of variance in Hearthstone, is very difficult to consistently, get through. Like, you can also argue that the player that makes 2 top 4s is better than the player that wins 1 tournament. So even if they do take the person that wins, then maybe that's not necessarily the best case either. So yeah, it's very difficult. As you mentioned, sign up is a problem, especially for people that like work, right? You can sign up for all of them and just like not check in to a lot of them, which is what I was doing at first. But the problem is that when you do all of a sudden go, oh, actually, I can all of a sudden play this one on the weekend, let's say, and you might then not have signed up for it. If you haven't signed up for it, you have to like sign up or register, check in, and then hope to get in on one of the like 224 slots. And that's pretty unlikely a lot of the time. So getting into those is difficult. Then getting through that 224 person Masters tournament, you have to win. Sorry, the Masters qualifier, you have to win that. So you have to come first in 224 players. Then you have to make it. Then you have to pay for your accommodation, flights, etc. to get to the Masters tournaments, one of 3 throughout the year. Then you have to perform very well in that event, which is, let's say, 250 plus person Swiss event with all like top players, because they've already gone through this first step of the gauntlet. And then you have to do that another 2 times before you even have an idea whether you're going to get invited. You can't, let's say, come first in season 1, know you're guaranteed, in the first tour, the first Masters tournament, know you're going to be invited, and then not have to fork over the costs and the time investment to play in Masters tournaments 2 and 3, because you have no idea how the relegation is going to work for this second season, and how they're going to determine who gets to get a shot at the Grandmasters. So,
and even just to make it that much more confusing, is if we look at even on the official Hearthstone's website, like this, the article the blog post where they talk about this, you'll notice that they say in this year there's going to be 2 seasons. Relegation is going to happen at the end of season 2. But there are 3 Masters tours, like tour events. So, in my simple maths brain, 3 and 2 are not the same. So immediately the question comes now is, hypothetically, 3 different people win the 3 Masters events, and all 3 of them are, let's say, well-known, or all 3 of them are not very well-known. Now, how does Blizzard now decide, okay, we like you two, but not you?
So I mean, that the math does kind of work there, because actually there's going to be more than 3 spots, because remember, it's 2 per region. So there's actually 6 spots total. So if you just take the winners of each thing,
oh, sure.
Then it's fine. But you need to actually find the other 3 spots. So what do you take the second place in each? And then what if they don't fit the regions? What if all of the tournaments, what if all of the top 4s on all of the tournaments are EU players only? What do they do? Like, okay, how do you decide what, like, okay, fine. Let's say you take the 3 winners there. Let's say it's all top 4s are all EU, all different players. You take the 3 top players for each one. You put them in the qualifier to maybe get into EU. Or that doesn't even work. Like, maybe you just take 2 of them. And how do you decide who's got the biggest stream? Maybe who's got the more Twitter followers?
That's like a popular like even just you telling me now. I'm like that becomes a popularity contest, and
like I just don't get how you can have these master or is it if you win how you perform in the Masters thing in America means you therefore are going to have to play in the Grandmasters for Americas, but that doesn't make any sense. I could, as a South African, somebody on a relatively EU time zone, or somebody on an APAC time zone, perform well and fly to the American event, perform well there, and then I have to play all the rest of my games on an American time zone if I get into Grandmasters. I mean, maybe it's fine because if you get into Grandmasters, you're earning enough money that you can do it full time, but I don't know. Like it
becomes so difficult.
Yeah, like you have keeping these Grandmasters regionalized. I can understand their reasons for doing it in a way that it makes scheduling easier and stuff for the matches and time zones for opponents and stuff. But on the other hand, like it's so difficult because you have to always you're limiting yourself to always replace from that region, and the Masters tours below it are not regionalized in that same way. So the structure breaks down where you could have all APAC players performing well in the Masters tours, all America's players performing well in the Masters tours, or all European players. And it doesn't really work.
So you touched on a bit of the topic, but basically what Noblord also kind of touched on is that this system, what it basically does is means that like a smaller group of people essentially can become hardcore pros in terms of like fully can depend on like live off Hearthstone essentially, whereas a far greater number of semi-pros or amateurs or whatever essentially have to accept that they play Hearthstone part-time and they need to get a job in terms of earning money. Like Hearthstone is not their full-time. So basically for the majority of us, even if you aspire to, let's say, be a competitive Hearthstone player, you've got to, because you see sometimes people on social media like, I'm gonna give up
school for a year,
school for a year, or work for a year to put all my time to Hearthstone. And now that's basically like, previously that was semi-viable because of so many tournaments and also ladder.
Yeah, and because frankly, to do that, you actually had to put in that amount of time, like to earn enough HCT points to reach playoffs in certain regions, cough EU. You kind of actually had to put in that much time that it was very difficult to do the others. And
whereas now, basically, you can take an entire year off school, work, or whatever, and you probably still might not. You might make it to a Masters event, and then which you have to pay, like we said, you have to pay your way, and then you'll get knocked out there. And all that's while you have no form of income really. So it just kind of solidifies a small group and makes it a lot harder for everyone else.
Yeah, in a socioeconomic sense, it is greatly increasing the wealth gap, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
The
Hearthstone pro scene. That's really what it comes down to, is that these select 48 players can be comfortable in their ability to play Hearthstone full time. A couple of them already were, because they probably make more money off their streams than they'll make in Grandmasters as well, to be quite frank. But for all the players outside of that, it's just so risky. Like, you have to be supported by a team probably in order to put in enough time. And then once again, we get back to that problem of Masters qualifiers don't really work if you have a job. So maybe you have to take a weird job where you can make your schedule work. Like, you have to work freelance or something. And in that case, you get stuck in a scenario where you might not necessarily be progressing your career outside of Hearthstone in the right way. So I think it's creating a very unhealthy scene for the Masters players, which is quite concerning, right?
Yeah, I mean, the big problem is also it's a case of even looking at like if you're an aspiring master players, like what do you now? How do you like if you're not in Grandmaster? How do you convince a team to pick you up? Like it's virtually impossible, right? Because like ladder means very little now in terms of actually tangible returns. I
Yeah.
mean, sure there might be some small third party, like there might be some third party events, but ultimately it's not previously like you could say, oh, I got 100 ACT points, or
Yeah.
I did well in the ACT playoffs. It's like, cool. I got through the first stage of of the Masters Cup. Okay, cool. So did 300 other people. Oh, I went there and I got knocked out. Like,
Or even I came top 16. Okay. And then
yeah,
I qualified for the next one. I also came top 16. Okay. What's the chance Blizzard are going to invite you to Grandmasters on 2 top 16s? Probably not much. Are
yeah.
you
That's what I'm saying is
are
it's
you
very
probably
difficult.
on that close to that level of top 48 players in the world when you hit 2 top 16s?
Well,
Probably somewhere near
yeah.
there. Like if you had 2 out of 3 top 16s. But
So it's just, I mean, this is just for this year. We will have to see if they decide to continue it or what they make changes for next year. But even just without even seeing it happen, it just sounds like it's producing a very, I mean, like sort of segregated sort of community, like a
yeah.
segregated sort of competitive scene.
I think kind of the scenario that this leaves a lot of players that were on the fringes, maybe that were trying or not, or maybe trying like how do I put it, not
Make a big
going
break.
full time into it necessarily or coming in and out. I think it really punishes those players. I mean, the example I kind of have for this is Sixo, right? So Sixo, Surrender, and Hoy are all part of SKT, which is a very big Korean like esports organization. Now, they have all kind of been a little bit in and out of Hearthstone this year. Sixo and Hoy were both playing quite a lot of Artifact. I say this year, that was technically last year already. I'm talking about the 2018 season when I say this year, really. And maybe they also took breaks from Hearthstone. They still competed and still made playoffs, I think, but didn't really have the kind of shining years that we saw from them in like 2017, where Hoy and Surrender in particular did really well. So now, I mean, if we look at the leaked list once again, I mean, Sixo is not on that list. What's the return for SKT to keep him? Probably pretty low. What's the chance of him getting into Grandmasters? Pretty low. So what does he do? I mean, he's not a player that really streams a lot, so he has to go find some other game that gives him a higher chance at like making it as a competitor, right? And I think those types of players are a big loss to the scene.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at like because of all of the way that Blizzard chose their 16 players, let's say for Europe, I can like probably just off the top of my head, I can probably rattle about a dozen to 2 dozen really good players who now would miss out and who probably the team will decide, okay, it's not worth it, and who then essentially get lost to competitive Hearthstone, right? I mean, especially when it comes to the disproportionate like player base, like EU has a lot more strong players than the other regions.
Yeah, I mean EU is an absolute uh, cluster thing that I'm gonna try not swear.
Flustercuck.
Like yeah, cluster. Yeah, that one. Before I say the wrong one entirely again. And like EU, I think is the area that I have the most egregious issues with. And to be honest, the player I have the most egregious issue with is Pavel. Like RDU, I get. He's had a shocker of a 2018, really. Like he was talking about not going to tour events anymore and like almost talking in a way that he was gonna like quit. I don't know if that was really his intention, but his stream's been doing better. Kalento and Tice both have very big streams, so fair enough. I can understand them from the streaming aspect. Same as Silvername. Pavel has been a joke in 2018 in Hearthstone. He's been invited to events where he seemingly has not seen the cards before going to the event.
Oh yes, I remember
and
that.
This is more than once. He's done that twice this year, where he's seemingly known nothing about Hearthstone, as if he's not been paying any attention to Hearthstone, like almost not even been playing. Now, Pavel's a far better player than me, probably, but it's shocking if a player is basically just not taking the game seriously in any way, and is then invited to the most, serious, prestigious of tournaments, basically. And it's not for streaming purposes. Like, he's a great personality for the viewers, I suppose. Lots of people love him, I suppose. But what has he done that, since he won the World Champions, what has he done that's deserved him? Nothing. So what this leads me to believe is that they're inviting him because he's a previous world champion, right? I mean, we haven't seen APAC, but I assume Tom will get an invite there, and that's fair enough. He's definitely been one of the standout players in the APAC region for quite a few years anyway, besides his winning of the World Championships. Pavel is the... Firebat is the one previous NA winner, or America's winner, so he's invited. Pavel invited, and then Oskaka's missing, but Oskaka also hasn't really been involved in Hearthstone, so even less than Pavel over 2018. So maybe they didn't invite him for that reason. Maybe they invite him and he turned it down. Who knows? And so I'm just annoyed at some of these choices, because EU in particular, as you mentioned, is such a stacked region. It's just ridiculous. We could easily end up in a scenario where we have more EU players doing well in the Masters events than any other region. And then how do they decide which ones get the chance to go to play off for the Grandmaster spots or get invited to replace the other players? I don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, Blizzard, I would assume, have been purposely very, vague, and, they haven't been very sort of, these are there haven't been, there aren't a lot of numbers or, hard criteria, right? To say, previously it was, points. There was a number, there was an empirical value. Whereas now it's play, win some things, do the thing well, and maybe we'll choose you, maybe we won't. Who knows?
Maybe we'll choose you if we like you. Maybe we won't, and we don't like you for a specific reason. Maybe one time you said something mean to the guy that makes the final decisions of this on Twitter, and now you're actually never going to get invited no matter how well you do, and you've been blacklisted, and you don't, and there's no way for you to know that, right?
Because I mean,
that's how the shady world of invites for tournament stuff works. You can be blacklisted without even knowing.
And I mean, it comes down to, I mean, kind of what we say. It's, I mean, if you let's say, especially if you're now a no-name player trying to make it big, you could come top 4 in, let's say, 3 of the Masters tours, and you still might not get chosen if a person, let's say a well-known player, wins one of them. Blizzard can argue that, but it could exactly happen the same way, where you win one, and this well-known player comes top 4 in 3 of them and gets chosen anyway. So, if you're a no-name player, it's you're going to constantly be in a losing position, right? Unless you somehow win 3 Masters tours in a row, then they pretty much have no choice to select you, right?
Yeah, or you can do well in Masters Tours whilst growing a stream or growing a fan base or growing in some other ways like that. Some community contribution.
Yeah. And I mean, that will end up sustaining you, not actually the Grandmasters then. Yeah,
and I mean, ultimately, I think this, bringing this back to a local context, and there's one kind of question I think is important to ask. This is a little bit of a personal question in a way, but what does this mean for South African players and players that are in fringe regions? I remember last year when we spoke about the HCT, We got a lot of responses from players in like Brazil and like that areas like that, where they have similar economic issues and similar kind of lack of attention in a way from Blizzard. I mean, Brazil's definitely got a lot more than South Africa attention from Blizzard, that is. But it's still expensive for them to travel to all these events. And it's the same scenario for South African players, if not even more so. And I mean, the question is really, where does this leave us, players like that? And I mean, the answer is we're pretty much clucked, as you might say.
Yeah, so I mean, realistically, I mean, even in the old system, it was still very difficult for us to do well, right? So, and I mean, even like realistically, I'm not sure if we have like enough players that can compete on that level.
Sure.
But but the principle is always still the whole thing of like having the dream and the vision, and still like it's been plausible, right? Like the fact is, like you could like theoretically someone could still have ground ladder, done well, and then gain enough HT points and do well in the qualifier. Whereas now it's like all those chances have been reduced minusculely, and even in one of the early stages, you're gonna have to fork out a ton of money to get to one of these. You know, if you make it.
Yeah.
And so it's just like now, before you can even have that dream, the dream is dashed.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's like now it's kind of like you even want to compete, knowing that there's the gate is locked for you, basically.
Yeah, I feel like it's been getting progressively harder for people in fringe regions to compete, right?
Yeah.
I mean, last year you probably needed to attend multiple tour events and score points in them, which means, let's say you needed to score points in one tour event a season. That means you probably needed to attend on average 3 to 4 a season to have a chance of scoring points, because let's say you needed top 16 at least, like that's 6 points for last year, to have a chance of qualifying for playoffs. Now, that's very difficult to attend multiple events when you live in like South Africa and you have 26-hour travel time, even to Europe. You have like 30-odd hour travel time to like some Southeast Asian countries or to America. And so that means you have to take 2 days off of work either way, or almost. And then your flight expenses are a lot because you're flying from quite far. So, flight prices are a lot more expensive. And then you have to look at the currency conversion issues, where everything in the place you're going is more expensive, because if you're in like South Africa, our local currency doesn't trade that well against like the dollar, for instance.
Oh boy, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it just leaves you in a really tough scenario if you're like in one of these fringe regions. I mean, we speak about South Africa, but I think there's a lot of people in a lot of fringe regions that can sympathize with a lot of the same issues that we're talking about. And I mean, that's
realistically now, for like, let's say, like you say, in the fringe regions, the options become like WESG and WCG in terms of trying to get international exposure or trying to compete overseas. In a more practical manner. Those are kind of the main, like going through Blizzard's official channels is not particularly viable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, look, if there was somebody that wanted to make it in the competitive Hearthstone scene and was asking me for advice in one of these regions, I'd probably say focus on streaming, quite frankly. Because it seems you're going to need to build a following and something and a fan base like that, so that you can support yourself to get through all the time it takes in the Masters qualifiers, even if you're just streaming your participation in the Masters qualifiers. And then you're going to need that financial backing from your stream, hopefully, to get you to the Masters tournaments. And then you need that popularity backing from your stream for Blizzard to invite you to the Grandmasters qualifiers. So it really seems that the focus for a lot of aspiring competitive players should be to stream. And the problem with that is it's very difficult to break the streaming community in a game with a declining viewership and very well established popular streamers across all like time slots, right? I mean, it's much easier as a new streamer to play a new game where there's a whole new audience with new like where there aren't necessarily as many established people in that game. So, I mean, realistically, that's saying that it's probably not that good to stream Hearthstone or to compete in Hearthstone. So yeah, you really have to have like a serious passion for wanting to compete. And whilst this all sounds very dire for anyone in that scenario, I would say that it is definitely good for players if you want to. Like, it can still be fun to play in Masters qualifiers. You can still get packs out of them, so they're not zero reward. There's no real financial reward for them in that scenario, but you can grow your collection and get to play more Hearthstone as a result. I would encourage a lot of people, even if they don't necessarily intend to travel to a Masters qualifier, to try and test themselves, to travel to a Masters event, to still try and test themselves if they get a chance in the Masters qualifiers. But realistically, your chances of making it as a professional player, especially coming from a fringe region and out of nowhere, are a lot slimmer now.
Yeah, so we hope we haven't given it's all complete gloom and doom.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and then the final other thing that we just going to touch on briefly is how do you think specialist plays into all of these structure changes? Like, do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing for everything that we've just discussed?
So okay. I mean, I don't know. Do you want to quickly explain if people aren't 100% sure what specialist is? Or
well, I mean, specialist is basically a one deck best of 3 format where you can have 2 sideboard versions of your deck with up to 5 card difference.
Yeah. So the one good thing about specialist is it does help. Like, if you're a newer player, so like let's say you need to play on a server that's not your main server, it is potentially a low barrier to entry because now, I mean, basically, let's say you need your deck, which is 30, and then if you want a fully kitted out sideboard, you need at most 40 cards.
Yeah.
And I mean, in one class, which is obviously a lot easier than previously, best of 5 where you need 3 full decks of 30 cards.
Yeah, well, 4 decks.
Or 4 decks.
So that was 120. So yeah, anything from 90 to 120.
So in that regards, it is a little bit kind of to those, budget players. But the main concern I'm worried is actually I mean, first of all, right now we have the problem where Hunter's just so prevalent.
Yeah.
Where I think with last I checked, of all 60% of like top 8 were Hunter.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
that's
mostly
a really
mid-range
large
Hunter
number
as well.
And a very large percentage of that was mid-range Hunter, I think.
Yeah.
So that presents a problem, especially from a broadcasting point of view. Is like, if you just are now streaming Hunter mirrors.
Imagine the first Grandmasters tournament, and it's 60, and let's say they have to submit decks for like 2 weeks or something, and the first 2 weeks is just 16 Hunter mirrors. Wow, that would be shocking.
Even if we just go like, let's say 8, if there's just 8 Hunters, and like a lot of the other classes, you just get very boring matchups to watch over and over again. Because it will become like, okay, Hunter versus Priest. Okay, this is the matchup. Okay, it's Hunter versus Priest again. Okay, it's Hunter versus Priest again. Oh,
it's a Hunter mirror now. It's a Priest mirror now.
And the fact that also you've seen a lot of the same cards means that you'll be like, obviously you'll be more familiar, but that familiarity kind of, I think, makes it a lot more bland.
Yeah.
And I mean, even from the casting, I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't watched any casting of Specialist, but like at least when you had like best of 5 series where it was like a combination of matchups, it made it interesting to talk about matchups. But now, over a few series, how much can you really say about a Hunter mirror or about a Hunter versus an odd Paladin, for argument's sake?
And I mean, basically, what we've seen, or what I've seen from the decks we've seen doing well, or I hesitate to say lineup because it's basically one deck and some sideboards. So the decks we've been seeing doing well in the specialist tournaments and the I just completely lost my point. Yeah, so the decks we've been seeing doing well in the specialist tournaments are are pretty much usually structured so that the two sideboard options is like one anti-control, one anti-aggro, let's say. And
Yeah.
so what that means is it's pretty easy to identify whether the deck you're playing against is the control or the aggro deck. So it's pretty obvious what the players are going to sideboard. So there isn't really any interesting discussion for the casters to have around ban strategy because there's no bans, as you say. So there's no, and you can't discuss about how they've built their lineup. You can discuss how they built their sideboards, but at 5-card sideboards, they don't really do much yet. That's my experience of specialist.
And also basically it's like aggro versus control. Oh, the aggro player switched to their sort of and their anti-control text build. Oh, the control players switch to their anti-aggro, their more anti-aggro list. Oh, okay,
like
cool.
You could basically, if you look at the two deck lineups, you should basically be able to predict the decks that each person's going to play. Because in the first game, it's always the primary. And then in the second and third games, if a player decides that their secondary or their tertiary deck is better against their opponent, they're going to stick with that. They're not going to change that. Like if your second deck is anti-aggro tech and you're playing, let's say, mid-range hunter, and you're up against like a zoo or something, you're going to switch to the second deck and you're going to stick with the second deck, and your zoo is going to switch to whichever deck is better against the hunter, which is probably just their primary because hunter is the most popular. So they're going to play their primary deck 3 times. You're going to play your primary at most. You're going to play your primary deck once, and then you play your secondary deck twice at most. So like, there's no strategy in queuing lineups. Like, anyway.
And even then, the other problem, sorry, just tie into that, is so like you thought in Conquest, the RNG rolling a bad matchup was bad. Like, like you rolled and you're like, oh damn, I hit my one unfavorable. Yep. Now you run even the bigger risk of, oh damn, it's almost my entire lineup is just trash now because it's Hunter versus Paladin, or it's Mage versus Paladin. Oh, like, my entire lineup, no matter what attacks I've made, this is very like this series is unfavorable for me. Like,
so I saw this in one of the specialist qualifiers, the final. Sorry, in one of the Masters qualifiers, the final was control, Warlock versus odd Paladin. And you kind of feel for the odd Paladin player in that scenario. Like, that is a terrible matchup for them, and you're just never building your lineup to care about control Warlock. So we're not talking cube Warlock or even Warlock, like control Warlock.
Oh my god.
And I mean, what scenario does that leave you in? Like, okay, you can have some sideboard text, but there's almost no amount of sideboard text that are going to turn that into a favorable matchup for you as the odd Paladin. So,
exactly.
You've gone all the way 10, 12 hours through this Masters qualifier to get a bad matchup in the final and then have to start again tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of people on Twitter complain, like, basically saying, this is like the third time I've reached top 4, top 8, and then you get, like, high rolled by something dumb. Like, no, I understand Hearthstone is Hearthstone, but, like, sometimes it reaches a point where you're like, oh, you faced the single control Warlock.
Yeah.
The single control Warlock. Whoops. Well, unlucky for you, buddy. Try again.
Okay, but
anyway.
to look on the positive side of Specialist a little bit, I mean, for Grandmasters, it helps with this whole narrative. Yeah, it's shorter. It also helps with the whole narrative of like this player, and you can root for them because they're like a rogue specialist, but then maybe sometimes they play something else, and then I don't know how that works with the narrative. It's like, ooh, they're switching it up, or is the narrative, why are they not playing rogue, and then all the people that were supporting them because they were playing rogue are now upset, not playing rogue are now upset. Anyway, so I mean, it can help create characters a bit more in Grandmasters. I feel like that creating characters is not going to exist below Grandmasters because I feel like
no one's going to know about them.
It's just too hard to get enough camera time as a player below that level, basically.
Yeah.
To kind of build a persona as a specialist, unless you already have one or you have it from streaming. Like, I mean, that's basically...
And the other problem now also becomes is, like, we also have to wait and see once rotation happens how the new meta develops, because like I say, right now we are in, and I mean, we hopefully the specialist does not become what it currently is, where one
Yeah.
deck or one class dominates by a significant margin, and
Yeah.
because like that already is not healthy. So obviously rotation should shake that up, but hopefully we don't. I mean, like just imagine we had specialists back in the day of Karazhan, where mid-range Shaman was deck.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
just imagine
the way
how
Conquest
fun.
worked there, right? Was you just banned Shaman. Like every lineup
Yeah.
was just banning Shaman. It didn't
Or
matter.
try to target it, or try to soft target it, but that failed most.
that didn't work. So
Yeah.
everyone banned Shaman. So you knew that you were going into a tournament. You basically didn't have a ban, and there was 8 classes that existed. That's basically what the scenario becomes. But if that's specialist, there's no ban, because you obviously can't ban the one class the person brought, and everyone brings mid-range Shaman because it's impossible to freaking beat it. So it means Blizzard have to be a lot faster with their balance changes, which admittedly they have been recently, and they have to do a lot more to keep the meta healthy for the specialist tournaments.
Yeah, because otherwise,
to impact their broadcasts, which is a very important thing for them, I hope, and to make it not incredibly tedious for the qualifier players, which it kind of already is, because you play against a lot of Hunter.
Because how long has Specialists been out for? Not even 2 months? Not even a month? 2 months?
Yeah, I think the tournament started in March, so only.
So I mean, barely a full month, and like we're reaching the point where one deck or one class is like 50 to 60%.
And I mean, it's kind of stayed like that.
Yeah,
it's peaked a little bit higher, but it's stayed like that.
It's more or less stayed like that. And even though people try and talk, like, hopefully that doesn't become, the sort of precedent going forward, because then that's very unhealthy.
Yeah. But anyway, I think that there's a lot still to be seen as to whether specialist is a good format. I think it's a little unfair to judge it in the current meta.
Sure.
We'll have to see. But yeah, I mean, we've spoken a lot about this Masters and Grandmasters stuff. I think it's very important to discuss. I'm really keen to hear what anyone else has to think. If you want to reach out to us to discuss it with us, you can always find us on Twitter. You can find Pandemonia at PandemoniaZA. His handle is underneath his face over there. And you can find me at dib_gaming on Twitter or Twitch now, as I finally changed that.
Your boys.
I'm gonna try to get back to streaming again soon. Maybe even stream some Masters qualifiers if I play in them in the evenings, or try and stream them. But you can also obviously leave any comments on YouTube. We're usually pretty good at responding to those, so feel free to share if you have any thoughts about the many different topics we've discussed today. Shout out to a lot of people in the community that do a lot of work for kind of summarizing a lot of these talking points for us to talk about. So like Noblord for a lot of the Noblord and Dorinda for a lot of the stuff that's informed our Grandmaster discussion. And I'm gonna butcher his name now. I don't know. I like his tweets a lot, so my advice would be to find it via my Twitter. But
I know exactly who
you know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah. Anyway, shout out to him for doing a lot of the work about calculating metrics and figuring out the popularity of all these specialist format tournaments that we've been talking about. I mean, a lot of those numbers come from him and the specialist meta reports that they've been doing. So those have been really useful. So shout out to them as well. But yeah, I mean, I think that's all we have for this episode. We'll be back again next week, hopefully, to discuss Rise of Shadows and some more exciting, happy news rather than these slightly inflamed discussions about the future of Hearthstone esports. But I am kind of weirdly still, even after all of this, looking forward to watching Grandmasters. As horrible as that might sound, because it's not good for me as a player, but I'm still kind of interested to see it. So yeah, let's see how it all pans out. But for us, or for me, cheerio.
Bye-bye.